Hello and welcome to episode 74 of the Berean Manifesto, brought to you by the Ekklesian House. This is Pastor Bill, and over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to take a look at not repaying evil with evil. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 22, it says, "Do not say, 'I will avenge this evil.' Wait on the Lord, and he will rescue you." In 2 Samuel, King David's son, Absalom, is leading a rebellion, trying to usurp his father's throne. Not only does David not command the capture and death of his son and his forces, he commands that Absalom should be protected at all costs. So David and his entire household, except for 10 concubines that he leaves behind to take care of the palace, flee Jerusalem for safety. In chapter 16, when they arrive at Bahurim, a man belonging to the family of the house of Saul was just coming out. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he was yelling curses as he approached. He threw stones at David and all the royal servants, the people and the warriors on David's right and left. Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed, you wicked man. The Lord has paid you back for all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you became king. And the Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son, Absalom. Look, you are in trouble because you're a man of bloodshed." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go and remove his head." The king replied, "Sons of Zeruiah, do we agree on anything? He curses me this way because the Lord told him, 'Curse David.' Therefore, who can say, 'Why did you do that?'" Then David said to Abishai and all his servants, "Look, my own son, my flesh and blood intends to take my life. How much more now this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse me. The Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will see my affliction and restore goodness to me instead of Shimei's curses today." So David and his men proceeded along the road as Shimei was going along with the ridge of the hill opposite him. As Shimei went, he cursed David, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Finally, the king and all the people with him arrived exhausted, so they rested there. If it had been any other king at pretty much any other point in history, it's likely that Shimei would have lost his head for insulting and throwing rocks at the king and his servants. But David, despite all his failings, sees the world through a different lens. David knows that if he repays this man's offensive behavior with evil of his own, then not only is he handing his kingdom over to his son by throwing fuel on his rebellion, but he's turning his back on God. David knew that he needed to wait on the Lord to defend him and to take care of his son's followers and their rebellion. In the end, Absalom's rebellion is brought to a sudden end, with his mule running him into the low-hanging branches of a large oak tree. Absalom's head got caught in the tree branches, and the mule kept riding without him, leaving him hanging. Socrates said, "How excellent it is to do good to our friends, and at the same time to make friends of our enemies." In the same vein, about 400 years later, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 45, Jesus says, "You have heard it said, Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the evil and the righteous and the unrighteous. Thomas Cranmer, who was Archbishop of Canterbury from 1532 to 1534, was reportedly so adept at walking out this verse that it was said if you wanted to become his friend, all you had to do was treat him poorly. It's a tip that I personally think Catherine of Aragon could have used before Cranmer oversaw the annulment of her marriage to Henry VIII. Not that being Cranmer's friend did Henry's next wife, Anne Boleyn, any good, but still a good tip that Catherine probably could have had. In the same teaching here from chapter 5 of Matthew, Jesus says, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also." Specifically, Jesus is talking about teachings in the Old Testament, teachings in the books of the law. We're looking at Exodus chapter 21, verses 23 through 25. If there is an injury, then you must give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, wound for wound. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 24, verses 19 through 20. If any man inflicts a permanent injury on his neighbor, whatever he has done is to be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he inflicted on the person, the same is to be inflicted on him. And Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 21. Do not show pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. Jesus is teaching that there is a better way than the way that the people have been living up to this point. As hard as it was for them to hear that this idea that had been ingrained in them and trained to them and taught to them in the law, as hard as that was for them to hear that there was a better way, it's just as hard to hear today when people hurt us, or even worse, they hurt our loved ones. But to show ourselves as true disciples of Christ, to really walk out that relationship and be Christ to the world today, we must forgive those that hurt us before we turn it into a quarrel, before we turn it into a fight, before we turn it into an occasion to be arrested for retaliatory felony. We are not justified as victims or justified as friends and families of victims by delivering the second blow. We'll get nowhere by delivering that retaliatory blow. We must trust the Lord to deliver the justice that is deserved and to take care of us and our loved ones in the meantime. This is Pastor Bill saying, until next time.